leaders' socio-cultural reform movements, and their leaders Raja Ramohan Roy and Brahmo Samaj Raja Ramohan Roy, 1772–1833, often called the father of Indian Renaissance and the maker of modern India, was a man of versatile genius. Ramohan Roy believed in the modern scientific approach and principles of human dignity and social equality. He put his faith in monotheism. He wrote Gift to Monotheists, 1809, and translated into Bengali the Vedas and the five Upanishads to prove his conviction that ancient Hindu texts support monotheism. In 1814, he set up the Atmiya Sabha, or Society of Friends, in Calcutta to propagate the monotheistic ideals of the Vedanta and to campaign against idolatry, caste rigidities, meaningless rituals, and other social ills. Strongly influenced by rationalist ideas, he declared that Vedanta is based on 218, a brief history of modern India reason, and that, if reason demanded it, even a departure from the scriptures is justified. He said the principles of rationalism applied to other sects also, particularly to the elements of blind faith in them. In his Precepts of Jesus, 1820, he tried to separate the moral and philosophical message of the New Testament, which he praised, from its miracle stories. He earned the wrath of missionaries over his advocacy to incorporate the message of Christ into Hinduism. He stood for a creative and intellectual process, off-selecting the best from different cultures, over which, again, he faced orthodox reaction. Raja Ramohan Roy founded the Brahmo Sabha in August 1828. It was later renamed Brahmo Samaj. Through Sabha, he wanted to institutionalize his ideas and mission. The Samaj was committed to the worship and adoration of eternal, unsearchable, immutable being who is the author and preserver of the universe. Prayers, meditation, and readings of the Upanishads were to be the forms of worship, and no graven image, statue or sculpture, carving, painting, picture, portrait, etc., were to be allowed in the Samaj buildings, thus underlining the Samaj's opposition to idolatry and meaningless rituals. The long-term agenda of the Brahmo Samaj to purify Hinduism and to preach monotheism was based on the twin pillars of reason and the Vedas and Upanishads. The Samaj also tried to incorporate the teachings of other religions and kept its emphasis on human dignity, opposition to idolatry, and criticism of social evil such as sati. Ram and Roy did not want to establish a new religion. He only wanted to purify Hinduism of the evil practice which had crept into it. Roy's progressive ideas met with strong opposition from orthodox elements like Raja Radhakant Deb, who organized the Dharma Sabha to counter Brahmo view. Raja Ramohan Roy and his Brahmo Samaj form the starting point for all the various reform movements, whether in Hindu religion, society, or politics, which have agitated modern India. 8. Survey of Reform Movements and Leaders, 219 Samaj Propaganda. Roy's death in 1833 was a setback for the Samaj's mission. The features of Brahmo Samaj may be summed up in this way. Black Circle, it denounced polytheism and idol worship. Black Circle, it discarded faith in divine avatars, incarnations. Black Circle, it denied that any scripture could enjoy the status of ultimate authority, transcending human reason and conscience. Black Circle, it took no definite stand on the doctrine of karma and transmigration of soul, and left it to individual Brahmos to believe either way. Black Circle, it criticized the caste system. His ideas and activities were also aimed at political uplift of the masses through social reform, and to that extent can be said to have had nationalist undertones. Raja Ramohan Roy's efforts at social reform. Ramohan was a determined crusader against the inhuman practice of sati. He started his anti-sati struggle in 1818, and he cited sacred texts to prove his contention that religion sanctioned the burning alive of widows, besides appealing to humanity, reason, and compassion. He also visited the cremation grounds, organized vigilance groups, and filed counter-petitions to the government during his struggle against sati. His efforts were rewarded by the government regulation in 1829, which declared the practice of sati a crime. As a campaigner for women's rights, Roy condemned the general subjugation of women and opposed prevailing misconceptions, which formed the basis of according an inferior social status to women. Roy attacked polygamy and the degraded state of widows, and demanded the right of inheritance and property for women. Ramohan Roy did much to disseminate the benefits of modern education to his countrymen. He supported David Hare's efforts to found the Hindu College in 1817, while Roy's English school taught mechanics and Voltaire's philosophy. In 1825, he established a Vedanta college where courses in both Indian learning and Western social and 220, a brief history of modern India physical sciences were offered. He also helped enrich the Bengali language by compiling a Bengali grammar book and evolving a modern elegant prose style. Ramohan was a gifted linguist. He knew more than a dozen languages including Sanskrit, Persian, Arabic, English, French, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. A knowledge of different languages helped him broad-base his range of study. As a bold supporter of freedom of the press and a pioneer in Indian journalism, Roy brought out journals in Bengali, Hindi, English, Persian to educate and inform the public and represent their grievances before the government. As a political activist, Roy condemned oppressive practices of Bengali zamindars and demanded fixation of maximum rents. He also demanded abolition of taxes on tax-free lands. He called for a reduction of export duties on Indian goods abroad and abolition of the East India Company's trading rights. He demanded the Indianization of superior services and separation of the executive from the judiciary. He demanded judicial equality between Indians and Europeans and that trial be held by jury. Ramohan was an internationalist with a vision beyond his times. He stood for cooperation of thought and activity and brotherhood among nations. His understanding of the universal character of the principles of liberty, equality, and justice indicated that he well understood the significance of the modern age. He supported the revolutions of Naples and Spanish America and condemned the oppression of Ireland by absentee English landlordism and threatened emigration from the empire if the Reform Bill was not passed. Roy had David Hare, Alexander Duff, Debendranath Tagore, P.K. Tagore, Chandrasekhar Deb, and Tarachand Chakraborty as his associates. Views I regret to say that the present system of religion adhered to by Hindus is not well calculated to promote their political interests. It is, I think, necessary that some change should take place in their religion at least for the sake of their political advantage and social comfort. Raja Ramohan Roy. Survey of Reform Movements and Leaders, 221 Debendranath Tagore and Brahmo Samaj Maharishi Debendranath Tagore, 1817–1905. Father of Rabindranath Tagore and a product of the best in traditional Indian learning and Western thought, gave a new life to Brahmo Samaj and a definite form and shape to the theist movement when he joined the Samaj in 1842. Earlier, Tagore headed the Tattvabodhini Sabha, founded in 1839, which, along with its organ Tattvabodhini Patrika in Bengali, was devoted to the systematic study of India's past with a rational outlook and to the propagation of Ramohan's ideas. A new vitality and strength of membership came to be associated with the Brahmo Samaj due to the informal association of the two sabhas. Gradually, the Brahmo Samaj came to include prominent followers of Ramohan, the Derosians and independent thinkers such as Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar and Ashwini Kumar Datta. Tagore worked on two fronts. Within Hinduism, the Brahmo Samaj was a reformist movement. Outside, it resolutely opposed the Christian missionaries for their criticism of Hinduism and their attempts at conversion. The revitalized Samaj supported widow remarriage, women's education, abolition of polygamy, improvement in riots conditions, and temperance. Keshab Chandra Sen and the Brahmo Samaj experienced another phase of energy. When Keshab Chandra Sen, 1838–84, was made the Acharya B. Debendranath Tagore soon after the former joined the Samaj in 1858. Keshab, also spelt Keshab, was instrumental in popularizing the movement, and branches of the Samaj were opened outside Bengal, in the United Provinces, Punjab, Bombay, Madras, and other towns. Unfortunately, Debendranath did not like some of Sen's ideas which he found too radical, such as cosmopolitanization of the Samaj's meetings, by inclusion of teachings from all religions and his strong views against the caste system. Even open support worships the true God daily must learn to recognize all high's fellow countrymen as brethren. Keshab Chandra Sen. 222. A brief history of modern Indian intercaste marriages. Keshab Chandra Sen was dismissed from the office of Acharya in 1865. Keshab and his followers founded the Brahmo Samaj of India in 1866, while Debendranath Tagore's Samaj came to be known as the Adi Brahmo Samaj. In 1878, Keshab's inexplicable act of getting his 13-year-old daughter married to the minor Hindu Maharaja of Cooch Behar, with all the orthodox Hindu rituals Kasadanathar, split in Keshab's Brahmo Samaj of India. Earlier, Keshab had begun to be considered as an incarnation by some of his followers, much to the dislike of his progressive followers. Further, Keshab had begun to be accused of authoritarianism. After 1878, the disgusted followers of Keshab set up a new organization, the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj. The Sadharan Brahmo Samaj was started by Ananda Mohan Bose, Sib Chandra Deb, and Umesh Chandra Dutta. It reiterated the Brahmo doctrines of faith in a supreme being, one God, the belief that no scripture or man is infallible, belief in the dictates of reason, truth, and morality. A number of Brahmo centers were opened in Madras province. In Punjab, the Dale Singh Trust sought to implant Brahmo ideas by the opening of Dale Singh College at Lahore in 1910, significance of the Brahmo Samaj in matters of social reform. The Samaj attacked many dogmas and superstitions. It condemned the prevailing Hindu prejudice against going abroad. It worked for a respectable status for women in society, condemned sati, worked for abolition of the purdah system, discouraged child marriage and polygamy, crusaded for widow remarriage, and for provisions of educational facilities. It also attacked casteism and untouchability, though in these matters it attained only limited success. The influence of the Brahmo Samaj, however, did not go much beyond Calcutta and at most Bengal. It did not have a lasting impact. Prarthana Samaj in 1867, Keshab Chandra Sen helped Atmaram Panjarang found the Prarthana Samaj in Bombay. Earlier, the Brahmo Survey of Reform Movements and Leaders, 223 ideas spread in Maharashtra. A precursor of the Prarthana Samaj was the Paramahansa Sabha, something like a secret society to spread liberal ideas and encourage the breakdown of caste and communal barriers. Mahadev Govind Ranade, 1842–1901, joined the Samaj in 1870, and much of the popularity of and work done by the society was due to Highsforts. His efforts made the Samaj gain an all-India character. Other leaders of the Samaj were R.G. Bandarkar, 1837–1925, and N.G. Shandavarkar, 1855–1923. The emphasis was on monotheism, but on the whole, the Samaj was more concerned with social reforms than with religion. The Prarthana Sabha was very attached to the Bhakti cult of Maharashtra. The Samaj relied on education and persuasion and not on confrontation with Hindu orthodoxy. There was a four-point social agenda also. Disapproval of caste system. Roman 2, women's education. Roman 3, widow remarriage. And Roman 4, raising the age of marriage for both males and females. Dando Keshav Karv and Vishnu Shastri were champions of social reform with Ranade. Along with Karv, Ranade founded the widow remarriage movement as well as Widows' Home Association with the aim of providing education and training to widows so that they could support themselves. Young Bengal movement and Henry Vivian de Rosio during the late 1820s and early 1830s, there emerged a radical intellectual trend among the youth in Bengal, which came to be known as the Young Bengal movement. A young Anglo-Indian, Henry Vivian de Rosio, 1809–31, who taught at the Hindu College from 1826 to 1831, was the leader and inspirer of this progressive trend. Drawing inspiration from the Great French Revolution, de Rosio inspired his pupils to think freely and rationally, question all authority, love liberty, equality, and freedom, and oppose decadent customs and traditions. The de Rosians also supported women's rights and education. Also, Derozio was perhaps the first nationalist poet of modern India. The Derosians, however, failed to have a long-term impact. Derozio was removed from the Hindu college in 1831 because of his radicalism. The main reason for their 224, A Brief History of Modern India limited success was the prevailing social conditions at that time, which were not ripe for the adoption of radical ideas. Further, there was no support from any other social group or class. The Derosians lacked any real link with the masses. For instance, they failed to take up the peasants' cause. In fact, their radicalism was bookish in character. But despite their limitations, the Derosians carried forward Ramohan Roy's tradition of public education on social, economic, and political questions. For instance, they demanded induction of Indians in higher grades of services, protection of riots from oppressive zamindars, better treatment to Indian labor abroad in British colonies, revision of the company's charter, freedom of press, and trial by jury. Later, Surendranath Banerjee was to describe the Derosians as the pioneers of the modern civilization of Bengal, the conscript fathers of our race, whose virtues will excite veneration, and whose failings will be treated with gentlest consideration. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, the great scholar and reformer, Vidyasagar's ideas were a happy blend of Indian and Western thought. He believed in high moral values, was a deep humanist, and was generousdo the poor. In 1850, he became the principal of Sanskrit College. He was determined to break the priestly monopoly off scriptural knowledge, and for this he opened the Sanskrit College to non-Brahmins. He introduced Western thought in Sanskrit College to break the self-imposed isolation of Sanskritic learning. As an academician, he evolved a new methodology to teach Sanskrit. He also devised a new Bengali primer and evolved a new prose style. Vidyasagar started a movement in support of widow remarriage, which resulted in legalization of widow remarriage. He was also a crusader against child marriage and polygamy. He did much for the cause of women's education. As government inspector of schools, he helped organize 35 girls' schools, many of which he ran at his own expense. A secretary of Bethune School, established in 1849, he was one of the pioneers of higher education for women in India. Survey of reform movements and leaders 225. The Bethune School, founded in Calcutta, was the result of the powerful movement for women's education that arose in the 1840s and 1850s. The movement had to face great difficulties. The young students were shouted at and abused and, sometimes, even their parents subjected to social boycott. Many believed that girls who had received Western education would make slaves of their husbands. Balshastri Jampikar, 1812-46, was a pioneer of social reform through journalism in Bombay. He attacked Brahminical orthodoxy and tried to reform popular Hinduism. He started the newspaper Darpan in 1832. Known as the father of Marathi journalism, Jampikar used the Darpan to awaken the people to awareness of social reforms, such as widow remarriage, and to instill in the masses a scientific approach to life. In 1840, he started Digdarshan, which published articles on scientific subjects as well as history. Jampikar founded the Bombay Native General Library and started the Native Improvement Society, of which an offshoot was the Students' Literary and Scientific Library. He was the first professor of Hindi at the Elphinstone College, besides being a director of the Colaba Observatory. Paramahansa Mandali, founded in 1849 in Maharashtra, the founders of the Paramahansa Mandali, Dadoba Panjarang, Mataji Durgaram and others, began as a secret society that worked to reform Hindu religion and society in general. The ideology of this society was closely linked to that of the Manav Dharma Sabha. Besides believing that one God should be worshipped, the society also said real religion is based on love and moral conduct. Freedom of thought was encouraged as was rationality. The founders of the Mandali were primarily interested in breaking caste rules. At their meetings, food cooked by lower caste people was taken by the members. These Mandalis also advocated widow remarriage and women's education. Branches of Paramahansa Mandali existed in Pune, Satara, and other towns of Maharashtra. 226. A Brief History of Modern India, Jayaturo fuel and Savitribai fuel Jayaturo or Jayatiba fuel, 1827-90. Born in Satara, Maharashtra, belonged to the Mali gardener community and organized a powerful movement against upper caste domination and Brahminical supremacy. Fuel founded the Satyashadhak Samaj, Truth Seekers Society, in 1873, with the leadership of the Samaj coming from the backward classes, Malis, Telis Kunbis, Saris, and Dangars. The main aims of the movement were social service, and Roman II, spread of education among women and lower caste people. Fuel wanted social transformation, not just social reform. He was of the view that until the oppressed classes or the masses were educated, there would be no mass awakening, and social revolution would not be possible. Jayatiba wanted a society free of exploitation. Many believeth that Fuel introduced the Marathi word dalit, meaning crushed, to describe those outside the Varna system. He propagated what came to be called the Satyashadhak marriage ceremony, simple and inexpensive, besides making the services of the Brahmin priest redundant. Fuel's works, Sarvajanik Satyadharma and Gilam Jiri, became sources of inspiration for the common masses. Fuel used the symbol of Rajabali as opposed to the Brahmin symbol of Rama. Fuel aimed at the complete abolition of the caste system and socioeconomic inequalities. He was against Sanskritic Hinduism. This movement gave a sense of identity to the depressed communities as a class against those Brahmins who used religion and the blind faith of the Masesto exploit the masses for personal monetary gain. Jayatiba Fuel was given the title of Mahatma in 1888 by another Maharashtrian social reformer, Vithalrao Krishnaji Vandekar. Jayatiba was not allowed to continue schooling because of his caste. However, with help and encouragement from the Persian scholar Ghaffar Beg Munshi and a British official, Lizat Sahab, Jayatiba was admitted in a Scottish missionary school. The society of the day was against education of girls as well. Yet, he along with his wife. Survey of reform movements and leaders, 227 Savitribai, were instrumental in opening a school for girls in Pune. The school syllabus included mathematics, science, and social studies. Savitribai, also of the Mali community, was born in 1831 at Nagyan in Maharashtra's Satara district and was married to Jayatiba Fuel when a child of 9. Jayatiba, a firm believer in education for all, including women, taught his wife at home. Later, she took a teacher's training course. She faced abuse and humiliation from the people along the way when she walked to the school to teach, but she braved it to persist with her vocation. Savitribai also began to teach women and children from the downtrodden castes, including Mang and Mahar. She and her husband established 2 educational trusts, namely the Native Female School, Pune, and the Society for Promoting the Education of Mahars, Mangs, and others. Savitribai went on from girls' education to question many social evils and work towards eradicating them. She started the Mahila Seva Mandal to raise awareness about women's rights. She and her husband rigorously campaigned against the dehumanization of widows and advocated widow remarriage. Savitribai is said to have organized a successful barbers' strike to denounce the inhumane practice of shaving widows' heads. With her husband, she set up a home called Balhadiya Pratibandhak Griha, home to prevent infanticide, in 1863, where unwed mothers and widows who became pregnant under unfortunate circumstances could have safe deliveries instead of resorting to killing the infants or themselves. Savitribai is said to have organized a successful barbers' strike to denounce the inhumane practice of shaving widows' heads. She and her husband set an example against the Evolov untouchability by opening their own water storage to everyone. After Jayatiba's death, Savitribai took over the Satya Shadhak Samaj, presiding over the meetings, guiding the workers, and working for plague victims. She died in 1897, getting infected by the plague while caring for a patient. 228. A Brief History of Modern India. Savitribai wrote poetry, and 2 of her collections are Kavyaful and Bhavankashi Subodh Ratnakar. In August 2014, the name of the University of Pune was changed to Savitribai Fuel Pune University in honor of Savitribai Fuel. Gopal Baba Walankar, also known as Gopal Krishna, circa 1840-1900, was a pioneer in the cause of uplifting the Dalits from the socioeconomic oppression that they suffered. Indeed, Walankar is generally considered by Ambedkar Tobe the pioneer of the Dalit movement. Born into a Mahar family near Mahad in what is now Raigad district of Maharashtra, Gopal Krishna served in the army till he retired in 1886. He was deeply influenced by Jyotiba Phule. Walankar subscribed to Phule's idea of the Aryan invasion theory and said that the untouchable people of India were the indigenous inhabitants and that the Brahmins came from the invading Aryans. He contended that the concept of caste was contrived by the Aryan invaders to subjugate and control the Anaryans, who were the indigenous people. He formed a group of Mahar astrologers so as to give a sense of empowerment to the Mahars and reduce the importance of the Brahmins, as the service of setting the time for ceremonies was the only one that Brahmins had been willing to perform for the Mahars. Walankar founded the Anarya Dash Parihar Mandali, Society for the Removal of Evils Among the Non-Aryans. It was through this society that a petition was sought to be raised against the policy of the government to discontinue recruitment of Mahars in the army. In 1888, Walankar began publishing the monthly journal Vital Vidvansak, Destroyer of Brahmanical or Ceremonial Pollution. In 1889, he followed with a pamphlet Vital Vijuvansan, Annihilation of Ceremonial Pollution, which spoke against the position of untouchables in society. He has been called the first intellectual rebel from the Dalit community to have launched a scathing criticism of the caste. Survey of Reform Movements and Leaders, 229 system, and the position of Dalits in it. His approach was not so much a direct opposition to the elites of society. It was rather an appeal aimed at making them change their attitude. He also wrote Hindu Dharma Darpan, published in 1894. He contributed to Marathi language journals, such as Sudharak and Deen Bandhu, to arouse awareness and inspire the depressed classes. The attitude of the upper castes is manifest in the opposition they showed when Walankar was appointed to the local Taluk Board of Mahad in 1895. Kisan Faguji Bansad, 1879–1946, was born in a Mahar family at Mohapa village near Nagpur in Maharashtra. He wanted the Dalits boys and girls to be educated. He established the Chakhamla Girls' School at Nagpur. Setting up his own press in 1910, Bansad published the journals Nurashrit Hind Nagorik, Vital Vidvansak, and Major Patrika. He was one of the secretaries of the All India Depressed Classes Conference in 1920. Bansad was influenced by the Bhakti cult and the work of the Brahmo Samaj and the Prarthana Samaj. Though he also subscribed to the theory of the enslavement of the Dalits because of the Aryan invasion, he advocated reforms within Hinduism for the upliftment of the Dalits. Vitthal Ramji Shind, Maharshi Vitthal Ramji Shind, 1873–1944, was born in a Marathi family in Karnataka. He was influenced in his spiritual journey by the works of Tukaram, Eknath, and Ramdas. Brought up in a liberal intellectual atmosphere, he was also influenced by Hari Narayan Apt, Gopal Ganesh Agarkar, Mahadev Govind Ranade, Ramakrishna Gopal Bandarkar, G.B. Kotkar, among other thinkers. He joined the Prarthana Samaj and worked towards the removal of untouchability in India. He established a night school for the children of untouchables in Pune in 1905. He established the Depressed Classes Mission in Bombay in 1906. The mission was aimed at trying to get rid of untouchability, to provide 230, a brief history of modern Indian educational facilities for the untouchables, and try to solve the problems of the untouchables. Shind gave evidence before the Southborough Franchise Committee in 1919 and expressed the need for giving special representation to the untouchable class. He resigned as the executive of the Depressed Classes Mission when some of the members wanted the mission's affairs to be managed by their own people. He, however, continued to work for the depressed classes. He was in favor of a united front from the depressed classes and the caste Hindus, as he feared the British rulers would otherwise exploit the divisions in Indian society for their own advantage. He expressed his opposition to the caste system, idol worship, and inequities forced on women and the depressed classes, even as he was against meaningless rituals, the dominance of hereditary priesthood, and the very need for a priest to mediate between a devotee and God. He took part in the civil disobedience movement and was imprisoned in the Eurotas Central Jail. Shind was the author of Bharatiya Asprasyatika Prashna. Gopalhari Desmukh, Lakahitawadi Gopalhari Desmukh, 1823-92, was a social reformer and rationalist from Maharashtra. He held the post of a judge under British Raj, but wrote for a weekly Prabhakar under the pen name of Lakahitawadi on social reform issues. He advocated a reorganization of Indian society on rational principles and modern, humanistic, secular values. He attacked Hindu orthodoxy and supported social and religious equality. He wrote against the evils of the caste system. He said, "If religion does not sanction social reform, then change religion." Started a weekly, Haiteku, and also played a leading role in founding the periodicals Jayan Prakash, Indu Prakash, and Lakahitawadi. Gopal Ganesh Agarkar 1856-95, was an educationist and social reformer from Maharashtra. A strong advocate of the power of human reason, he criticized the blind dependency in tradition and false glorification of the past. He was a Survey of Reform Movements and Leaders 231 founder of the New English School, the Deccan Education Society, and Fergusson College. He was a principal of Fergusson College. He was also the first editor of Kesari, the journal started by Lokmanya Tilak. Later, he started his own periodical, Sudharak, which spoke against untouchability the caste system. The Servants of India Society, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, 1866-1915. A liberal leader of the Indian National Congress, founded the Servants of India Society in 1905 with the help of M.G. Ranade. The aim of the society was to train national missionaries for the service of India, to promote, by all constitutional means, the true interests of the Indian people, and to prepare a cadre of selfless workers who were to devote their lives to the cause of the country in a religious spirit. In 1911, the Hitavadi began to be published to project the views of the society. The society chose to remain aloof from political activities and organizations like the Indian National Congress. After Gokhale's death, 1915, Srinivasa Shastri took over as president. The society still continues to function, though with a shrunken base, at many places in India. It works in the field of education, providing ashram type of schools for tribal girls and balwadis at many places. Social Service League, a follower of Gokhale, Narayan Malhar Joshi founded the Social Service League in Bombay with an aim to secure for the masses better and reasonable conditions of life and work. They organized many schools, libraries, reading rooms, day nurseries, and cooperative societies. Their activities also included police court agents, work, legal aid and advice to the poor and illiterate, excursions for slum dwellers, facilities for gymnasia and theatrical performances, sanitary work, medical relief, and boys' clubs and scout corps. Joshi also founded the All India Trade Union Congress, 1920. The Ramakrishna movement and Swami Vivekananda, the didactic nationalism of the Brahmo Samaj, appealed more to the intellectual elite in Bengal, while the average Bengali. 232. A brief history of modern India found more emotional satisfaction in the cult of bhakti and yoga. The teachings of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, 1836-86, a poor priest at the Kali temple in Dakshineshwar, on the outskirts of Calcutta, who was known in childhood as Gadadhar Chattopadhyay, found many followers. Ramakrishna experienced spiritual trances, ecstasy, from a very early age. He is considered to have attained the highest spiritual experience available to Hindus. He did not write books. Buthai's conversations with people formed the basis of what were considered his teachings. He spoke simply, in the form of parables and metaphors, drawn from the observation of ordinary life and nature. But what he said was of universal relevance. Two objectives of the Ramakrishna movement were to bring into existence a band of monks dedicated to a life of renunciation and practical spirituality, from among whom teachers and workers would be sent out to spread the universal message of Vedanta as illustrated in the life of Ramakrishna. And Roman 2, in conjunction with lay disciples' talkery on preaching, philanthropic and charitable works, looking upon all men, women, and children, irrespective of caste, creed, or color, as veritable manifestations of the divine. Paramahamsa himself laid the foundations of the Ramakrishna math with his young monastic disciples as a nucleus to fulfill the first objective. The second objective was taken up by Swami Vivekananda after Ramakrishna's death, when he founded the Ramakrishna Mission in 1897. The headquarters of the Ramakrishna Math and Mission are at Belur near Calcutta. The two are twin organizations. Though legally and financially separate, Paramahamsa sought salvation through traditional ways-off renunciation, meditation, and bhakti amidst increasing westernization and modernization. He recognized the fundamental oneness of all religions and emphasized that Krishna, Hari, Ram, Christ, Allah are different names for the same God, and that there are many ways to God and salvation. As many faiths, so many paths. Paramahamsa's spirituality and compassion for the suffering humanity inspired those who listened to him. He used to say, "Service of man is the service of God." Survey of reform movements and leaders 233. Incidentally, Ramakrishna was married to Saradmani Mukherjee, later known as Sarada Devi. Ramakrishna considered Sarada as the embodiment of the Divine Mother. It was as Holy Mother that the disciples also knew her as. She played an important role in the work of the math and encouraging the young disciples in their mission. Swami Vivekananda Narendranath Datta, 1862–1902, who later came to be known as Swami Vivekananda, spread Ramakrishna's message and tried to reconcile it to the needs of contemporary Indian society. He emerged as the preacher of Neo-Hinduism. Certain spiritual experiences of Ramakrishna, the teachings of the Upanishads and the Gita, and the examples of the Buddha and Jesus, are the basis of Vivekananda's message to the world about human values. He subscribed to the Vedanta, which he considered a fully rational system with a superior approach. His mission was to bridge the gulf between paramartha, service, and vyavahara, behavior, and between spirituality and day-to-day life. Vivekananda believed in the fundamental oneness of God and said, "For our own motherland, a junction of the two great systems, Hinduism and Islam, is the only hope." Emphasizing social action, he declared that knowledge without action is useless. He lamented the isolationist tendencies and the touch-me-not attitude of Hindus in religious matters. He frowned at religion's tacit approval of the oppression of the poor by the rich. He believed that it was an insult to God and humanity to teach religion to a starving man. He pointed out that the masses needed two kinds of knowledge: secular knowledge about how to work for their economic uplift, and the spiritual knowledge to have faith in themselves and strengthen their moral sense. Heckled upon his countrymen to imbibe a spirit of liberty, equality, and free thinking. At the Parliament of Religions held at Chicago in 1893, Swami Vivekananda made a great impression on Peeplebi, his learned interpretations. The keynote of his opening address was the need for a healthy balance between spiritualism. 234. A brief history of modern Indian materialism. Envisaging a new culture for the whole world, he called for a blend of the materialism of the West and the spiritualism of the East into a new harmony to produce happiness for mankind. Vivekananda gave several lectures on Vedanta in the USA and in London before returning to India in 1897. In India, he delivered a series of lectures, the focus of which were to infuse into the new generation a sense of pride in India's past, a new faith in India's culture, and a rare sense of confidence in India's future, to bring about a unification of Hinduism by pointing out the common foundation of its sects, to make the educated people see the misery of the downtrodden and work for their uplift by the application of practical Vedanta principles. His emphasis was not only on personal salvation, but also on social good and reform. In 1897, he founded the Ramakrishna Mission. Vivekananda was a great humanist and used the Ramakrishna Mission for humanitarian relief and social work. The mission stands for religious and social reform. Vivekananda advocated the doctrine of service, the service of all beings. The service of jiva, living objects, is the worship of Siva. Life itself is religion. By service, The divine exists within man. Vivekananda was for using technology and modern science in the service of mankind. Ever since its inception, the mission has been running views no other religion preaches the dignity of humanity in such a lofty strain as Hinduism, and no other religion on earth treads upon Thepur, and the low in such a fashion as Hinduism. Swami Vivekananda, a country where millions have nothing to eat, and where few thousand holy men and Brahmins suck the blood of the poor and do nothing at all for them, is not a country but a living hell. Is thy's religion or a dance of death? Swami Vivekananda forget not that the lower classes, the ignorant, the poor thalitarate, the cobbler, the sweeper are thy flesh and blood, thy brothers. Swami Vivekananda. Survey of reform movements and leaders 235, a number of schools, hospitals, dispensaries. It offers help to the afflicted in times of natural calamities like earthquakes, famines, floods, and epidemics. The mission has developed into a worldwide organization. It is a deeply religious body, but it is not a proselytizing body. It does not consider itself to be a sect of Hinduism. In fact, this is one of the strong reasons for the success of the mission. Unlike the Arya Samaj, the mission recognizes the utility and value of image worship in developing spiritual fervor and worship of the eternal omnipotent God, although it emphasizes on the essential spirit and not the symbols or rituals. It believes that philosophy of Vedanta will make a Christian a better Christian and a Hindu a better Hindu. It was in 1898 that Swami Vivekananda acquired a large piece of land at Belur, where the Ramakrishna math was finally shifted and registered as such. The monastic order is open to all men without discrimination on the basis of caste or creed. Dayananda Saraswati and Arya Samaj. The Arya Samaj movement, revivalist in form though not in content, was the result of a reaction to Western influences. Its founder, Dayananda Saraswati or Mulshankar, 1824–83, was born in the old Morvi state in Gujarat in a Brahmin family. He wandered as an ascetic for 15 years, 1845–60, in search of truth. The first Arya Samaj unit was formally set up by him at Bombay in 1875, and later the headquarters of the Samaj were established at Lahore. Dayananda's views were published in his famous work, Satyarth Prakash, The True Exposition. His vision of India included a classless and casteless society, a united India, religiously, socially, and nationally, and an India free from foreign rule, with Aryan religion being the common religion of all. He took inspiration from the Vedas and considered view so far as Bengal is concerned. Vivekananda may be regarded as the spiritual father of the modern nationalist movement. Subhash Chandra Bose. 236. A brief history of modern Indiatham to be India's Rock of Ages, the infallible and the true original seed of Hinduism. He gave the slogan, Back to the Vedas. Dayananda's slogan of Back to the Vedas was a call for a revival of Vedic learning and Vedic purity of religion and not a revival of Vedic times. He accepted modernity and displayed a patriotic attitude to national problems. Dayananda had received education on Vedanta from a blind teacher named Swami Virajananda in Mathura. Along with his emphasis on Vedic authority, he stressed the significance of individual interpretation of the scriptures and said that every person has the right of access to God. He criticized later Hindu scriptures, such as the Puranas and Thainarant priests, for perverting Hinduism. Dayananda strongly criticized the escapist Hindu belief in Maya, illusion, as the running theme of all physical existence and the aim of human life as a struggle to attain moksha, salvation, through escape from this evil world tosek union with God. Instead, he advocated that God, soul, and matter prakriti were distinct and eternal entities and every individual had to work out his own salvation in the light of the eternal principles governing human conduct. Thus, he attacked the prevalent popular belief that every individual contributed and got back from the society according the principles of niyati, destiny. Dayananda believed in the theory of karma and reincarnation, but he also said the good deeds should be primarily for the good of others and not for self. Dayananda launched a frontal attack on Hindu orthodoxy, caste rigidities, untouchability, idolatry, polytheism, belief in magic, charms, and animal sacrifices, taboo on sea voyages, feeding the dead through shraddhas, etc. Dayananda subscribed to the Vedic notion Chaturvarna system, in which a person was identified as a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaisya, or Sudra, not by birth but according to the occupation and merit of the person. The Arya Samaj fixed the minimum marriageable age at 25 years for boys and 16 years for girls. Swami Dayananda lamented the Hindu race as the children of children. Survey of Reform Movements and Leaders 237. The 10 guiding principles of the Arya Samaj are: God is the primary source of all true knowledge. Roman 2. God, as all truth, all knowledge, almighty, immortal, creator of universe, is alone worthy of worship. Roman 3. The Vedas are the books of true knowledge. Roman 4. An Arya should always be reddito, accept truth and abandon untruth. Dharma, that is, due consideration of right and wrong, should be the guiding principle of all actions. Romans 6. The principal aim of the Samajis to promote world's well-being in the material, spiritual, and social sense. Romans 7. Everybody should be treated with love and justice. Roman 8. Ignorance is to be dispelled and knowledge increased. Roman 9. One's own progress should depend on uplift of all others. Social well-being of mankind is to be placed above an individual's well-being. The Arya Samaj's social ideals comprise, among others, the fatherhood of God and brotherhood of man, equality of the sexes, absolute justice and fair play between man and nation and nation. Intercaste marriages and widow marriages were also encouraged. Dayananda also met other reformers of the time: Keshab Chandra Sen, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Ranade, Desmukh, etc. The Arya Samaj came to be known for the social service it rendered in times of calamities such as earthquake, famine, and floods. It also took initiative in promoting education. After the death of Dayananda in 1883, the work of the Samaj was carried on by illustrious members. Education was an all-important field for the Samaj. The Dayananda Anglo-Vedic (DAV) College was established in 1886 at Lahore. But a difference of opinion between two groups in the Samaj arose over the curriculum of the DAV College. One group was known as the College Party. Some sources say Culture Party, among whose leaders were Lala Hansraj, Lala Lal Chand, and Lala Lajpat Rai, and the other was the Mahatma, later Gurukul party led by Guru Datta Vidyarthi and Lala Munshi Ram, who later came to be known as Swami Shraddhanand. While the College Party favored the government curriculum and English education to meet economic and professional needs, the Mahatma Party was interested in introducing the study of Sanskrit and Vedic. 238. A brief history of modern India philosophy in the tradition of ancient Gurukuls. Later, the issue of vegetarianism also became a point of contention. The College Party had nothing against non-vegetarianism, claiming that diet was a personal choice, and it was not mentioned in the principles of the Samaj. The Mahatma Party was in favor of all the Aryas being strict vegetarians. In Thind, the Arya Samaj split in 1893 over these issues. The College Party retained control over the DAV school and college, while the Arya Pratinidhi Sabha, Punjab, and a majority of the local Arya Samaj branches were taken over by the Mahatma Party. Swami Shraddhanand opened the Gurukul in 1900 at Gujranwala, in West Punjab, now in Pakistan. In 1902, the Gurukul was moved to Kangri near Haridwar, hence the name Gurukul Kangri. The Gurukul aimed at providing an indigenous alternative to Lord Macaulay's education policy by offering education in the areas of Vedic literature, Indian philosophy, Indian culture as well as modern sciences and research. The Gurukul believed in radical social reform. It founded the Kanya Mahavidyalaya Jalandhar in 1896 and sponsored education for widows. The Arya Samaj was able to give self-respect and self-confidence to the Hindus, which helped to undermine the myth of superiority of whites and the Western culture. In its zeal to protect the Hindu society from the onslaught of Christianity and Islam, the Samaj started the Shuddai, purification, movement to reconvert to the Hindu fold the converts to Christianity and Islam. An aggressive campaign of Shuddai led to increasing communalization of social life during the 1920s and later, snowballed into communal political consciousness. The Shuddai movement also attempted to uplift those regarded as untouchables and outside the caste system of Hindus into pure caste Hindus. Seva Sadhan, a Parsi social reformer, Bairamji M. Malabari, 1853–1912, founded the Seva Sadhan in 1908 along with a friend, Diwan Dayaram Gijamal. Malabari spoke vigorously against child marriage and for widow remarriage among Hindus. It was Heisforts that led to the Age of Consent Act, regulating the age of consent for females. Seva Sadhan specialized in taking survey of reform movements and leaders 239 care of those women who were exploited and then discarded by society. It catered to all castes and provided the destitute women with education and medical and welfare services. Bairamji Malabari acquired and edited the Indian Spectator. Dev Samaj, founded in 1887 at Lahore by Shiv Narayan Agnihotri, 1850–1927, earlier a Brahmo follower, Dev Sadhan is a religious and social reform society. The society emphasized on the eternity of the soul, the supremacy of the guru, and the need for good action. It called for an ideal social behavior such as not accepting bribes, avoiding intoxicants and non-vegetarian food, and keeping away from violent actions. Its teachings were compiled in a book, Deva Shastra. Agnihotri spoke against child marriage. Dharma Sabha Radhakant Deb founded this Sabha in 1830. An orthodox society, it stood for the preservation of the status quo in socio-religious matters, opposing even the abolition of sati. However, it favored the promotion of Western education, even for girls. Bharat Dharma Mahamandala, an all-India organization of the Orthodox educated Hindus, it stood for a defense of Orthodox Hinduism against the teachings of the Arya Samajists, the Theosophists, and the Ramakrishna Mission. Other organizations created to defend Orthodox Hinduism were the Sanatana Dharma, Sabha 1895, the Dharma Maha Parishad in South India, and Dharma Mahamandali in Bengal. These organizations combined in 1902 to form the single organization of Bharat Dharma Mahamandala, with headquarters at Varanasi. This organization sought to introduce proper management of Hindu religious institutions, open Hindu educational institutions, etc. Pandit Madan Mohan Malaviya was a prominent figure in this movement. Radhaswami movement. Tulsi Ram, a banker from Agra, also known as Shiv Dayal Sahib, founded this movement in 1861. The Radhaswamis. 240, a brief history of modern India. Believe in one supreme being, supremacy of the guru, accompany of pious people, satsang, and a simple social life. Spiritual attainment, they believe, does not call for renunciation of the worldly life. They consider all religions to be true. While the sect has no belief in temples, shrines, and sacred places, it considers as necessary duties, works of faith and charity, service and prayer. Sri Narayana Guru Dharma Paripalana, SNDP, movement. The SNDP movement was an example of a regional movement born out of conflict between the depressed classes and upper castes. It was started by Sri Narayana Guru Swami, 1856–1928, among the Ajavas of Kerala, who were a backward caste of toddy tappers and were considered to be untouchables and were denied education and entry into temples. The Ajavas were the single largest caste group in Kerala, constituting 26% of the total population. Narayana Guru, himself from the Ajava caste, took a stone from the Nayar River and installed it as a Sivalinga at Aravipuram in Sivaratri in 1888. It was intended to show that consecration of an idol was not the monopoly of the higher castes. With these, he began a revolution that soon led to the removal of many discriminations in Kerala's society. The movement, Aravipuram movement, drew the famous poet Kumaran Asan as a disciple of Narayana Guru. In 1889, the Aravipuram Kshetra Yagam was formed, which was decided to expedito a big organization to help the Ajavas to progress materially as well as spiritually. Thus, the Aravipuram Sri Narayana Guru Dharma Paripalana Yagam, in short SNDP, was registered in 1903 under the Indian Companies Act, with Narayana Guru as its permanent chairman and Kumaran Asan as the general secretary. In the formation of SNDP, the efforts of Dr. Palpu must be acknowledged. He had started the fight for social justice through movements like Ejava Memorial, Malayali Memorial, etc. Sri Narayana Guru held all religions to be the same and condemned animal sacrifice, besides speaking against. Survey of Reform Movements and Leaders 241 Divisiveness on the basis of caste, race, or creed. On the wall of the Aravipuram temple he got inscribed the words, devoid of dividing walls of caste or race, or hatred of rival faith, we all live here in brotherhood. He urged the Ejavasto leave the toddy tapping profession and even to stop drinking liquor. The SNDP Yagam took up several issues for the Ejavas, such as right of admission to public schools, Roman 2, recruitment to government services, Roman 3, access to roads and entry to temples, and Roman 4, political representation. The movement as a whole brought transformative structural changes such as upward social mobility, shift in traditional distribution of power, and a federation of backward castecinto, a large conglomeration. Vakaliga Sangha. The Vakaliga Sangha in Mysore launched an anti-Brahmin movement in 1905. Justice movement. This movement in Madras Presidency was started by C.N. Mudaliar, T.M. Nair, and P. Tyagaraja to secure jobs and representation for the non-Brahmins in the legislature. In 1917, Madras Presidency Association was formed, which demanded separate representation for the lower castes in the legislature. Self-respect movement. This movement was started by E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar, a Balaja Naidu, in the mid-1920s. The movement aimed at nothing short of a rejection of the Brahminical religion and culture, which Naikar felt was the prime instrument of exploitation of the lower castes. He sought to undermine the position of Brahmin priests by formalizing weddings without Brahmin priests. Temple entry movement. Significant work in this direction had already been done by reformers and intellectuals like Sri Narayana Guru and Den Kumaran Asan. T.K. Madhavan, a prominent social reformer and editor of Desabhimani, took up the issue of temple. 242. A brief history of modern Indiantry with the Travancore administration. Nothing transpired. In the meanwhile, Vaikom, in the northern part of Travancore, became a center of agitation for temple entry. In 1924, the Vaikom Satyagraha, led by K.P. Kesava, was launched in Kerala demanding the throwing open of Hindu temples and roads to the untouchables. The Satyagraha was reinforced by Jathas from Punjab and Madurai. Gandhi undertook a tour off Kerala in support of the movement. Again, in 1931, when the civil disobedience movement was suspended, temple entry movement was organized in Kerala. Inspired by K. Kelapan, poet Subramaniam Turumambu, the singing sword of Kerala, led a group of 16 volunteers to Guruvayur. Leaders like P. Krishna Pillai and A.K. Gopalan were among the satyagrahis. Finally, on November 12, 1936, the Maharaja of Travancore issued a proclamation throwing open all government-controlled temples to all Hindus. A similar step was taken by the C. Rajagopalachari administration in Madras in 1938. Indian Social Conference founded by M.G. Ranade and Raghunatha Rao. The Indian Social Conference met annually from its first session in Madras in 1887 at the same time and venue as the Indian National Congress. It focused attention on the social issues of importance. It could be called the Social Reform Cell of the Indian National Congress. In fact, the conference advocated intercaste marriages, opposed polygamy and Kulinism. It launched the pledge movement to inspire people to take a pledge against child marriage. Wahhabi/Waliullah movement. The teachings of Abdul Wahhab of Arabia and the preachings of Shah Waliullah, 1700-263, inspired this essentially revivalist response to Western influences and the degeneration which had set in among Indian Muslims, and called for a return to the true spirit of Islam. He was the first Indian Muslim leader of the 18th century to organize Muslims around Thetwofold ideals of this movement. Desirability of harmony among the four schools of Muslim jurisprudence which had. Survey of Reform Movements and Leaders, 243, divided the Indian Muslims. He sought to integrate the bestelments of the four schools. Roman 2, recognition of the role of individual conscience in religion, where conflicting interpretations were derived from the Quran and the Hadiths. The teachings of Waliullah were further popularized by Shah Abdul Aziz and Sid Ahmed Barelvi, who also gave them a political perspective. Un-Islamic practices that had crept into Muslim society were sought to be eliminated. Sid Ahmed called for a return to the pure Islam and the kind of society that had existed in the Arabia of the Prophet's time. India was considered to be Darul Harb, land of the Kafirs, and it needed to be converted to Darul Islam, land of Islam. Initially, the movement was directed at the Sikhs in Punjab, but after the British annexation of Punjab, 1849, the movement was directed against the British. During the 1857 revolt, the Wahhabis played an important role in spreading anti-British feelings. The Wahhabi movement fizzled out in the face of British military might in the 1870s. Tiddu Mir's movement, Sid Mir Nisar Ali, popularly known as Tiddu Mir, was a disciple of Sid Ahmed Barelvi of Ray Bareilly, an adherent of the Wahhabi movement. Tiddu Mir adopted Wahhabism and advocated the Sharia. He organized the Muslim peasants of Bengal against the landlords, who were mostly Hindu, and the British indigo planters. The movement was not as militant as the British records made it out to be. Only in the last year of Tiddu's life was there a confrontation between him and the British police. He was killed in action in 1831. Farisi movement, the movement, also called the Faridi movement because of its emphasis on the Islamic pillars of faith, was founded by Haji Shariatullah in 1819. Its scene of action was East Bengal, and it aimed at the eradication of social innovations or un-Islamic practices current among the Muslims of their gen, and draw their attention to their duties as Muslims. Under the leadership of Haji's son, Dudu Mayan, the movement became revolutionary from 1840 onwards. He gave the movement an organizational system from the village to the 244, a brief history of modern India provincial level with a Khalifa or authorized deputy at every level. The Faridis organized a paramilitary force armed with clubs to fight the zamindars who were mostly Hindu. There were some Muslim landlords too, besides the indigo planters. Dudu Mayan asked his followers not to pay rent. The organization even established its own law courts. Dudu Mayan was arrested several times, and his arrest in 1847 finally weakened the movement. The movement survived merely as a religious movement without political overtones after the death of Dudu Mayan in 1862. Ahmadiyya movement. The Ahmadiyya forms a sect of Islam which originated from India. It was founded by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad in 1889. It was based on liberal principles. It described itself as the standard bearer of Mohammedan Renaissance and based itself, like the Brahmo Samaj, on the principles of universal religion of all humanity, opposing jihad, sacred war against non-Muslims. The movement spread Western liberal education among the Indian Muslims. The Ahmadiyya community is the only Islamic sect to believe that the Messiah had come in the person of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad to end religious wars and bloodshed, and to reinstate morality, peace, and justice. They believed in separating the mosque from the state as well as in human rights and tolerance. However, the Ahmadiyya movement, like Baha'ism which flourished in the West Asian countries, suffered from mysticism. Sir Sid Ahmed Khan and the Aligarh movement, the British view on the revolt of 1857, held the Muslims to be the main conspirators. This view was further strengthened by the activities of the Wahhabis. But later, an opinion got currency among the rulers that the Muslims could be used as allies against a rising tide of nationalist political activity represented, among others, by the foundation of the Indian National Congress. This was to be achieved through offers of thoughtful concessions to the Muslims. A section of Muslims led by Sid Ahmed Khan, 1817-98, was ready to follow the official patronage to stimulate a process of growth. Survey of reform movements and leaders 245 among Indian Muslims through better education and employment opportunities. Sid Ahmed Khan, born in a respectable Muslim family, was a loyalist member of the judicial service of the British government. After retirement in 1876, he became a member of the Imperial Legislative Council in 1878. His loyalty earned him a knighthood in 1888. He wanted Turcan-style Western scientific education with the teachings of the Quran, which were to be interpreted in the light of contemporary rationalism and science, even though he also held the Quran to be the ultimate authority. He said that religion should be adaptable with time or else it would become fossilized, and that religious tenets were not immutable. He advocated a critical approach and freedom of thought, and not complete dependence on tradition or custom. He was also a zealous educationist. As an official, he opened schools in towns, got books translated into Urdu, and started the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, later, the Aligarh Muslim University at Aligarh in 1875. He also struggled tabring about an improvement in the position of women through better education, and by opposing purdah and polygamy, advocating easy divorce, and condemning the system of Piryand Muridi. He believed in the fundamental underlying unity of religions, or practical morality. He also preached the basic commonality of Hindu and Muslim interests. Sid Ahmed Khan argued that Muslims should first concentrate on education and jobs, and try to catch up with their Hindu counterparts, who would gain the advantage of an early start. Active participation in politics at that point, he felt, would invite hostility of the government towards the Muslim masses. Therefore, he opposed political activity by Muslims. Unfortunately, in his enthusiasm to promote the educational and employment interests of the Muslims, he allowed himself to be used by the colonial government in its obnoxious policy of divide and rule, and in later years, started propagating divergence of interests of Hindus and Muslims. Sid's progressive social ideas were propagated through 246. A Brief History of Modern India. His magazine Tatibul Akhlaq, Improvement of Manners and Morals. The Aligarh movement emerged as a liberal, modern trend among the Muslim intelligentsia based in Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, Aligarh. It aimed at spreading modern education among Indian Muslims without weakening their allegiance to Islam. Roman II, social reforms among Muslims relating to purdah, polygamy, widow remarriage, women's education, slavery, divorce, etc. The ideology of the followers of the movement was based on a liberal interpretation of the Quran, and they sought to harmonize Islam with modern liberal culture. They wanted to impart a distinct socio-cultural identity to Muslims on modern lines. Soon, Aligarh became a center of religious and cultural revival of the Muslim community. The Deoband School, Darul Uloom. The Deoband movement was organized by the Orthodox section among the Muslim ulama as a revivalist movement with the twin objectives of propagating pure teachings of the Quran and Hadith among Muslims, and keeping alive the spirit of jihad against the foreign rulers. The Deoband movement was begun at the Darul Uloom, or Islamic Academic Center, Deoband, in Saharanpur district, United Provinces, in 1866 by Mohammad Qasim Nanatavi, 1832 AD, and Rashid Ahmed Gangohi, 1828-1905, to train religious leaders for the Muslim community. In contrast to the Aligarh movement, which aimed at the welfare of Muslims through Western education and support of the British government, the aim of the Deoband movement was moral and religious regeneration of the Muslim community. The instruction imparted at Deoband was in original Islamic religion. On the political front, the Deoband school welcomed the formation of the Indian National Congress, and in 1888 issued a fatwa religious decree against Sid Ahmed Khan's organizations, the United Patriotic Association and the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental Association. Some critics attribute Deoband's support to the nationalists more to its survey of reform movements and leaders 247 determined opposition to Sid Ahmed Khan than to any positive political philosophy. Mahmudul Hasan, the new Deoband leader, gave apolitical and intellectual content to the religious ideas of the school. He worked out a synthesis of Islamic principles and nationalist aspirations. The Jamiatul Ulama gave a concrete shape to Hassan's ideas of protection of the religious and political rights of the Muslims in the overall context of Indian unity and national objectives. Shibli Numani, a supporter of the Deoband school, favored the inclusion of English language and European sciences in the system of education. He founded the Nadwatul Ulama and Darul Uloom in Lucknow in 1894-96. He believed in the idealism of the Congress and cooperation between the Muslims and the Hindus of India to create a state which both could live amicably. Parsi reform movements. The Ranumai Mazdayasnan Sabah Religious Reform Association was founded in 1851 by a group of English-educated Parsis for the regeneration of the social conditions of the Parsis and the restoration of the Zoroastrian religion to its pristine purity. The movement had Naoroji Ferdinand, Dadabhai Naoroji, K.R. Kama, and S.S. Bengali as its leaders. The message of reform was spread by the newspaper Rast Gofter, Truth Teller. Parsi religious rituals and practice were reformed and the Parsi creed redefined. In the social sphere, attempts were made to uplift the status of Parsi women through removal of the purdah system, raising the age of marriage and education. Gradually, the Parsis emerged as the most westernized section of the Indian society. Sikh reform movements. The Sikh community could not remain untouched by the rising tide of rationalist and progressive ideas of the 19th century. The Singh Sabha movement was founded at Amritsar in 1873 with a twofold objective. To make available modern Western education to the Sikhs, and Roman II, to counter the proselytizing activities of Christian missionaries, as well as the Brahmo Samajists, Arya Samajists, and Muslim Maulvis. 248. A brief history of modern India. For the first objective, a network of Khalsa schools was established by the Sabha throughout Punjab. In the second direction, everything that went against the Guru's teachings was rejected, and rites and customs considered to be consistent with Sikh doctrine were sought to be established. The Akali movement, also known as Gurudwara Reform movement, was an offshoot of the Singh Sabha movement. It aimed at liberating the Sikh Gurudwaras from the control of corrupt Udasi Mahants, the post having become hereditary. These Mahants were a loyalist and reactionary lot, enjoying government patronage. The government tried its repressive policies against the non-violent non-cooperation satyagraha launched by the Akalis in 1921, but had to bow before popular demands. It passed the Sikh Gurudwaras Act in 1922, amended in 1925, which gave the control of Gurudwaras to the Sikh masses to be administered through Shiromani Gurudwara Prabandhak Committee, SGPC, as the apex body. The Akali movement was a regional movement, but not a communal one. The Akali leaders played a notable role in the national liberation struggle, though some dissenting voices were heard occasionally. The Theosophical Movement, a group of Westerners, led by Madame H.P. Blavatsky, 1831-91, and Colonel M.S. Alcott, who were inspired by Indian thought and culture, founded the Theosophical Society in New York City, United States in 1875. In 1882, they shifted their headquarters to Adyar, on the outskirts of Madras, at that time in India. The society believed that a special relationship could be established between a person's soul and God by contemplation, prayer, revelation, etc. It accepted the Hindu beliefs in reincarnation and karma, and drew inspiration from the philosophy of the Upanishads and Samkhya, Yoga, and Vedanta schools of thought. It aimed to work for universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. The society also sought to investigate the unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in man. The Theosophical movement came to be allied with the Hindu Renaissance. At one time, it allied with the Survey of Reform Movements and Leaders, 249 Arya Samaj II. It opposed child marriage and advocated the abolition of caste discrimination, uplift of, and improvement in the condition of widows. In India, the movement became somewhat popular with the election of Annie Besant, 1847-1933, as its president after the death of Alcott in 1907. Annie Besant had Comito India in 1893. She laid the foundation of the Central Hindu College in Benares in 1898, where both Hindu religion and Western scientific subjects were taught. The college became a nucleus for the formation of Benares Hindu University in 1916. Annie Besant also did much for the cause of the education of women. The Theosophical Society provided a common denominator for the various sects and fulfilled the urge of educated Hindus. However, to an average Indian, the theosophist philosophy seemed to be vague and lacking a positive program. To that extent, its impact was limited to a small segment of the westernized class. As religious revivalists, the theosophists did not attain much success, but as a movement of Westerners glorifying Indian religious and philosophical traditions, it gave much-needed self-respect to the Indians fighting British colonial rule. Viewed from another angle, the theosophists also had the effect of giving a false sense of pride to the Indians in their outdated and sometimes backward-looking traditions and philosophy. Significance of reform movement's positive aspects. The orthodox sections of society could not accept the scientific ideological onslaught of the socio-religious rebels. As a result of this, the reformers were subjected to abuse, persecution, issuing of fatwas, and even assassination attempts by the reactionaries. However, in spite of opposition, these movements managed to contribute towards the liberation of the individual from the conformity born out of fear, and from uncritical submission to exploitation by the priests and other classes. 250. A brief history of modern India. The translation of religious texts into vernacular languages, emphasis on an individual's right to interpret the scriptures, and simplification of rituals made worship a more personal experience. The movement's emphasis the human intellect's capacity to think and reason. By weeding out corrupt elements, religious beliefs and practices, the reformers enabled their followers to meet the official taunt that their religions and society were decadent and inferior. The reform movements gave the rising middle classes much-needed cultural roots to cling to, and served the purpose of reducing the sense of humiliation which the conquest by a foreign power had produced. A realization of the special needs of modern times, especially in terms of scientific knowledge, and thus promoting a modern, this worldly, secular, and rational outlook was a major contribution of these reform movements. Socially, this attitude reflected in a basic change in the notions of pollution and purity. Although traditional values and customs were a prominent target of attack from the reformers, yet the reformers aimed at modernization rather than outright westernization based on blind imitation of alien Western cultural values. In fact, the reform movement sought to create a favorable social climate for modernization. To the extent, these movements ended India's cultural and intellectual isolation from the rest of the world. The reformers argued that modern ideas and culture could be best imbibed by integrating them into Indian cultural streams. The underlying concern of these reformist efforts was revival of the native cultural personality, which had got distorted by various factors over the years. This cultural ideological struggle was to prove to be an important instrument in the evolution of national consciousness and a part of Indian national resolve to resist colonial cultural and ideological hegemony. However, not all these progressive, nationalist tendencies were able to outgrow the sectarian and obscurantist outlook. This was possibly due to the divergent duality of Survey of Reform Movements and Leaders, 251 cultural and political struggles, resulting in cultural backwardness despite political advancement. Negative aspects. One of the major limitations of the religious reform movements was that they had a narrow social base, namely educated and urban middle classes, while the needs of vast masses of peasantry and the urban poor were ignored. The tendency of reformers to appeal to the greatness of the past and to rely on scriptural authority encouraged mysticism in new garbs and fostered pseudoscientific thinking while exercising a check on the full acceptance of the need for a modern scientific outlook. But above all, the tendencies contributed, at least to some extent, in compartmentalizing Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and Parsis, as also alienating high-caste Hindus from low-caste Hindus. The emphasis on religious and philosophical aspects of the cultural heritage got somewhat magnified by an insufficient emphasis on other aspects of culture, art, architecture, literature, music, science, and technology. To make matters worse, the Hindu reformers confined their praise of the Indian past to its ancient period and looked upon the medieval period of Indian history essentially as an era of decadence. This tended to create a notion of two separate peoples, on the one hand. On the other, An uncritical praise of the past was not acceptable to the low-caste sections of society, which had suffered under religiously sanctioned exploitation during the ancient period. Moreover, the past itself tended to be placed into compartments on a partisan basis. Many in the Muslim middle classes went to the extent of turning to the history of West Asia for their traditions and moments of pride. The process of evolution of a composite culture, which was evident throughout Indian history, showed signs of being arrested with the rise of another form of consciousness, communal consciousness, along with national consciousness among the middle classes. Many other factors were certainly responsible for they. 252. A brief history of modern India. Birth of communalism in modern times. But undoubtedly, the nature of religious reform movements also contributed to it. On the whole, however, whatever the net outcome of these reform movements, it was out of this struggle that a new society evolved in India. Summary: Black reform movements. Among Hindus and for depressed classes, Bengal Raja Ramohan Roy and Brahmo Sama, Debendranath Tagore and Tattvabhidhini, Subhakeshab Chandra Sen, and Brahmo Samaj of India Prarthana Samaj Derozio, and Young Bengal Movement, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Western India Bal Shastri Jambikar students. Literary and scientific societies, Paramhansa Mandali's Jaitiba Phule and Satyashatak Samaj Gopal Walankar, Kisan Faguji Bansad Vitthal Ramji Shind, Gopal Hari Desmukh. Lakahitawadi Ganesh Agarkar Servants of India Society Southern Indiasri, Narayana Dharma Parapalana Movement, Vakaliga, Sangha Justice, Movement Self-Respect Movement Temple Entry Movement, All India Ramakrishna Movement, and Vivekananda, Dayananda Saraswati and Arya Samaj Theosophical Movement, Black. Among Muslims Wahhabi/Waliullah Movement Ahmadiyya Movement. Survey of Reform Movements and Leaders. 253 Sid Ahmed Khan, and Aligarh Movement Deoband Movement Black. Among Parsis Ranumai Mazdayasnan, Sabah Black. Among Sikh Singh, Sabah Movement Akali Movement Black. Positive aspects: liberation of individual from conformity out of fear psychosis. Worship made a more personal affair, cultural roots to the middle classes, thus mitigating the sense of humiliation. Much-needed self-respect gained, fostered secular outlook, encouraged social climate for modernization, ended India's cultural, intellectual isolation from rest of thewurled evolution of national consciousness. Black. Negative aspects: narrow social base indirectly encouraged mysticism over emphasis on religious. Philosophical aspects of culture while under-emphasizing secular and moral aspects. Hindus confine their praise to ancient Indian history and Muslims to medieval history, created a notion of two separate peoples and increased communal consciousness. Historical process of evolution of composite culture or restedo, some extent.